Palo Alto Networks firewall interface configuration. So now we're going to put these concepts to use, kind of really make a diagram and decide what you and I are going to do, and we're going to sit down and actually make something happen. So getting to dive in and really kind of taking a look at this, we are going to go through the steps that we need to do to really get our interfaces to a functional state. So we'll kind of talk a little bit about the profiles again. We already did the concept, so we'll figure out how to actually do it. And then a few zones and then some interfaces, kind of tying all of our pieces together. Now, really what I want to do is we'll kind of expand out our diagram over here as far as what it is we need to look at and kind of make this into, well, a more serious layout. So we'll take something that you and I would actually walk into a company and more than likely do. Okay, so remember real quick, what were the kinds of interfaces that we had available to us? Okay, so we had layer 2. Alright, we had some vWire. We certainly had layer 3. And we had the tap interface. And really one firewall, and this obviously doesn't include whatever other ancillary equipment you may have. You may have, a router out here and some switches and other things, whatever you have as far as establishing your real connectivity. A firewall is a point product. So it is not going to do everything. It's not going to have all the interfaces for everything on there. So you will have other pieces to configure depending on where and how you're going to place this in your network. So we'll kind of work with a few scenarios and see what we can get going. But really I want to concentrate on our vWire, certainly our layer 3, and a little bit of the tap. Okay, mostly because my PA200, I don't really have enough interfaces to get into some serious layer 2. So we'll talk about it a little bit as we go through, but we're really not going to do anything with it on here just because of that number of interfaces. I've got switches if I want to do layer 2. It's cheaper per port and much easier to do that way. So those are going to be where we're going to concentrate on things on here. And again, like I said, get us down to that basic configuration. So let's go ahead and kind of blow up my diagram here, not explode, but expand, okay, make it bigger, and we'll take a look at filling in some details on how we're going to do these things. Okay, so when I start to look at it, one of the things that I want to first kind of get into is, where VLANs are going to be. We have two real possibilities to look at here. We're going to have zones, which is my trust level. And then I have my subnets or VLANs, whatever I'll interact with on the rest of my network. So subnets. And really probably get into stuff here. So like users 1, we'll say is going to be VLAN 221. Users 2 is 222. My data center servers, we'll give this 251. And DMZ servers 252. Now, from an IP addressing standpoint, I want to use, let's see, 192.168.x.0/24, where x is going to be my VLAN number. So we will kind of keep things simple that way as far as what my addressing scheme is going to be. And I'll go ahead and let my firewall be the default gateway, so what we're going to tell my users about and everything else like that. So this can be a layer 3 setup for it. Now, in there, so let's say, we might have to draw something else for this. Well, let's kind of think of one that I may have out here. So we'll call this an extranet out here. Where I may have, some other client that I'm connecting with, or it could be a branch office or something like that. But I want to have that go directly into the data center. Okay, so that's going to be kind of one interesting configuration right here. Let me kind of take a look at these, and I can look at them, all 4 of them together. And let's see, something else that we might have. Different set of controls. Well, we can do it for the DMZ. That's kind of an interesting way of doing it. Another color. Well, we'll say to the servers up here. All right, now, so I've got a couple different things that I can look at right here, and this would be a prime candidate for possibly doing a tap interface. where I want to do some extra monitoring, and when we get more into the controls, we're going to see what things we can add on here. But I have extra stuff that I want to put into my DMZ servers and see what I want them to process or what I want them to look at, but I can do it out of band or out of line, if you will. Okay, so a tap is going to be a great way to do that. And I'll have a switch down here that we'll need to do a span port or a monitor session, or whatever vendor we're using, what term they use. But that will span everything into the Palo Alto. Okay, so tap interface be a great thing to do right there. My extranet, on the other hand, is a great candidate for a vWire. So I could do inline. So again, I'll have my router or something else set up over here, but this guy will end up being a transparent firewall at that point. Okay, so things will pass through, no IP address is needed, but I have a single, well, two interfaces, but I have a single path through the firewall going from my extranet to the data center servers. Okay, perfectly cool. Now right here, my pink is going to be my layer 3. Okay, so this is where I'm going to have to set things up for each of my 4 VLANs that I have, I guess, plus the internet. So we'll give this, I suppose, a 10 address. I don't know what number we want to give it. 205. That's always a good number. Okay. So, but anyway, wherever we're at, I'll set up my layer 3 setups right there in order to create everything that I want for monitoring between them. Now, that being said, I want to look at my layer 3, okay, because tap is just going to be reacting to it, vWire is pass-through, but in here, my layer 3, I'm going to have concepts for my zones. So I want to think about what those zones are going to be. Right? So what different separations am I going to have in here? I definitely want a DMZ zone. I definitely want an internet zone. I definitely want a data center. Now, do I want to separate my users, or do I want to treat them all together? Right? I mean, we could have separate VLANs, could have lots of different things for segmenting my users in my network, but unless I'm getting into separate controls for each of my types of users and deciding who sits where or what IP address based on their role, I probably will treat them all the same. So I'll go ahead and create a single user zone, okay, and kind of leave things as it is right now. And again, we can always get more granular. We can always split things off and do things differently later on. But this is going to give me a good starting point for how I want to set everything up. Because really, we're going to be looking at everything here from not just a physical interface, because obviously I've exceeded the number of interfaces that are going to be on this PA200 right here, but I'm looking from physical, these will be logical or sub-interfaces to a single physical trunk that will go out to, another switch or another router or something like that someplace. So I will have to interface with other networking equipment, but my concentration right here is going to be on the configuration of the Palo Alto firewall in terms of doing that. So get to pull this kind of stuff out, get to look at it, get to pull it all together, and kind of see where it is that we're going with it. So if I were you, I'd do something, jot down a diagram, make one yourself here real quick, copy the information however you want. We'll refer back to it a few times, but now I want to kind of go hop into the equipment and actually see what we can do and how to get this actually working. Alright, so diving into our GUI on here, let's go ahead and go into our network setup, because this is where we're going to see really all the pieces for where we want to get started with things. Now, I do kind of want to go down that list, and let's go ahead and create a management profile. So interface management right here. I have no profiles right now, but I'm going to go ahead and add one. I'll just call this basic, because this is probably what I want to do for just about everything. Actually, we'll create 2 of them. Okay, so I'll just create a basic one that I can allow ping to, okay, because pretty much every interface I think I would want to ping my layer 3 interfaces on there, or layer 3 address. And I'll create one more, and we'll call this basic user, where I would have not just my ping, but also my user ID information. And I'll go ahead and click all three of those for it. Okay, so I'm not going to do any management stuff. I do want to keep that just to my management interface, so kind of keep things out of band, if you will, but at least out of bounds of the user. But I'll still give some controls or some interaction as we move forward. So I've got two profiles there. That's really all there is to it. So poof, they're there. Now, next thing we want to do, and we talk logically about this, is set up my zones. So this is kind of my order of thinking for how I go through the steps on here. Now there is the trust and untrust that are built in right now, and that's actually perfectly fine because we can go ahead and still use these. But I want to add the zones that we were talking about before. Okay? So I have an iNet zone, which will be layer 3. I'm not going to worry about my interfaces yet because I will add them to it. Same thing with my user ID stuff. Right now, no inclusions, no exclusions, no nothing else. Zone protection profile, we haven't really configured. We'll get into that with the IPS portion. Log settings and things like that, we really don't have anything for forwarding or any of that jazz. So we're not going to enable anything else right now. All we're going to do is create it. Now, notice that, by the way, from a zone standpoint, from our configuration, we can put in what type it is. Okay, it is going to be a layer 3 zone that we're going to be dealing with on here. So remember, like I said, we can't really mix and match the same zone controls from like a virtual wire to a layer 3 or a layer 2 to a layer 3, things like that. So we have to specify what zone type it is, but in here, really all I want to deal with right now is the layer 3 side. So we have an iNet zone. And let's see, what else do we want? We wanted a DMZ zone. Real simple stuff. Add here a data center or DC zone. And let's see, what was the users. That was the other one. Okay, so just users. And we probably will go back and do user ID stuff later, but just kind of moving forward. So for right now, all we've done is create the zones. Nothing festive, nothing fancy, nothing too difficult about it. They're all going to be layer 3 in terms of where they're at. And later on, we'll see interfaces populate in here based on our later configuration. So this is one point. Now, and again, we can commit by stages if you want. Completely up to you. I don't like to get too far into things before doing a commit. One, just to test things out, but two, if something happens and you lose the firewall reboots or something like that, I get really irritated if I have to do lots of work all over again. So not that we expect things like that to happen, but that's one of those karma deals that the more that you do and don't save your work, the more the increased chance you have for something bad occurring. It's one of those things. At least in my life. Maybe you're lucky and more, kudos to you if you are, but it's one of those deals. So we'll go ahead and let this commit finish here, and then we'll move forward. Alright, so we have committed successfully. That's always a good thing. Get that going there, and now we're going to get where we want to be, which of course is the wonderful world of interfaces. And really we'll go to the Ethernet side of things. So when we get into the stuff, okay, now and I suppose interestingly enough, my VLAN interface right here is for when I'm doing the layer 3 side of a layer 2 firewall. So if I've created VLANs, so basically if my firewall is acting in a switch capacity, and I've got layer 2 stuff in there, but I'm also enabling the layer 3 termination of it, then I will have VLAN interfaces. For what we are doing, I really don't need to have that. Everything will be handled on the Ethernet side of the world. Okay? Now, really right now, my Ethernet 1 and 2, and again, we haven't figured out where anything is plugged in, so we can always control this, since we only have 4 interfaces. The type that we have on here, I certainly get to choose. Like I said, TAP, virtual wire, layer 2, layer 3, and the HA was high availability stuff. We'll leave this as a virtual wire for right now, but what I'll do is kind of comment on this of the extranet external connection. And zone is untrust, so we'll use that for our policies later on. Perfectly cool to leave it that way. It is going to be my default virtual wire. That, again, is perfectly fine. I haven't created any others. If I want to create more than one, I can do that here, because each virtual wire must have two and only two, so no less than two and no more than two interfaces assigned to it. So we already have one in here, so default vWire is perfectly cool, and I go ahead and change that. So really all I've done is added a comment, and we can do the same thing here to Ethernet 1.2. And just add a comment on here to extranet internal connection. And this is on the trust side of things. So again, my defaults for how we come out, perfectly fine. They will work well with how we're doing things. Now, so my next part right here. So we had that tap interface, and I'll just go ahead and stick it on 4 just for the heck of it. Okay. So here's my interface name. That's perfectly fine. Comment tap interface to specific DMZ, if I can type today, servers. Okay, and that's my interface type. That's all fine. My interface zone. Okay, so I don't have a tap zone created. Okay, so I can create a zone if that's something that I feel like doing on here. This will be, like I said, a tap zone for it. So we'll just call it tap DMZ. No other settings to it for right now, but that's perfectly fine. And add that to it, and poof, there we go. Okay, so that part's cool. Now, Ethernet 1.3. This is going to be where I'm going to do a whole lot of stuff on here. Now, when I get started, though, this is my default L3 interface. Whoops, not going to be a tap, though. We're going to be layer 3. Okay, so I am layer 3 in here. I must absolutely pick something on here as far as my virtual router, and again, default is fine. In the creation we're doing here, it's a single virtual router. Remember, by the way, routers are, well, a couple of different ways of looking at it. Routers are things that can talk to each other. Okay, so I'm going to be routing between certain sets of interfaces. If you have controls where you only want some things to talk to some other things, but not others, you can build a policy that does that, but I can also put them in separate virtual routers. And if you don't see the routes, well, you can't get to it. It's just not available. So we can keep things as simple as we want from that creation of a virtual router. I could also do a virtual system, depending on what firewall that I happen to be on. The PA200 doesn't allow me to do that. I can create virtual routers. I cannot create additional virtual systems. So a little bit of flexibility in there, but separation in lots of different ways for however it is that we choose to look at it. Okay, but for right now, default virtual router, perfectly cool. My security zone for the main interface, I'm really not applying anything to it, so I guess I can do whatever I want, but let's just create a new zone in here. We'll call this unused management. So that'll be good, because if nothing else, remember that when we get to our default policies, if I don't specify anything, inter-zone traffic is prohibited. So I'll drop everything, I'll reject the stuff on there. So that's perfectly cool to do. Go ahead and create that, and now we have our basic setup. But I had, 4 connections and there are 4 subnets that I'm going to be dealing with, so I got to find other things to put on there. Well, that's where we get to the wonderful world of add subinterface. You're going to tell me exactly what I want to do right here. And really my only option, since I only have one layer 3 interface, is going to populate as Ethernet 1.3. Now, this field right here is required. So what is going to be the sub-interface number that I want to put on it? Numerically, you can put whatever you want. Personally, I always make this number equal to what the VLAN associated or subnet associated with it is going to be. So what ones did we have? We had 221 was my first one, and I'll put the same thing for the tag number right here. So 221. No profile, this will be my users 1 subnet. Virtual router I must assign, so default. Security zone I must assign, that was going to be users. And my address. So I can stick an address on here. So, whoops, 192.168.221.1/24. which I guess you can click this if you want to. Go ahead and click it and see how it is. Okay, so users 1. So it tells you right here how to enter it. Okay, so enter the IP address / whatever, IP address or network for that portion. But we're just going to put a specific one, so IP address and netmask on there. And that's all that we have to do for it. And it'll tell us by name. It just goes through as another way of doing it. Okay? So we have my address there, have everything else. Hit OK. And that will create that information. So we'll go ahead and add these for the other ones. So let's see, I had a 222. Where are we at? Users 2. Ultra router default. Still in my users. Okay, and that's created. And let's see, what was my other one? 251 was, I think, my data center. Default security zone would be DC. And add an address here. Don't like that my cursor disappears. Okay. Alright. So my DCNet. I'm cool with that. And one last one. Where were we at? 252. That was my DMZ. Right. Last one, hit OK, and there we go. So at this point in time, well, at least once I commit anyway, I have a vWire set up, I have my main layer 3 interface, I have my tap interface over here, and I've created 4 sub-interfaces that I'm going to allow routing between because they're all connected to the same virtual router right here, and kind of give me all that information. So what have I got out of this? I have the same virtual router, yet I have different tags or VLAN IDs that I'm going to have for it, and different security zones associated with it. So those are going to be kind of my differences in there for how everything is going to start flowing once I get to my policies, once I get to kind of that information for it. Now, from what we did, again, anything from my layer 2 point of view is going to exist someplace else, namely on a switch. Okay, so that'll be a different piece of networking equipment. That's possibly a different part of your networking team, but that's nothing you're responsible for. But between you and I, we're responsible for the firewall. So this is what we've done here. We have our virtual wire set up over here. We have our tap set up over here, and we have all of our layer 3 stuff. Oops, right here. So all the cool things that we've done with this. just as a real quick thing to kind of point out on here, everything we did, by the way, was on the physical PA200 so far. We could play with the virtual one as well. Looking at my virtual machine settings, a couple different things. So inside the virtual machine itself, when you go into your configuration and under networking hardware, you have a single, well, I have a single physical NIC, and so one vSwitch or virtual switch. We can add multiple port groups on here, so basically, trunked interfaces, if you will. These virtual machine port groups that we have will be added as VM NICs. So I've created everything for VLAN 201 all the way down to 210, so basically put 10 interfaces, quote-unquote interfaces, virtual interfaces on my VM host right here. Now, what we can go ahead and do then on an individual virtual machine is assign how many NICs there are. Okay, so the first network adapter is going to be for my management, so I kind of left that as the default, the VLAN 100 for in my case. And the other ones that are on here, I put into the different port groups, and so we can see from the pull down what that information happens to be. So wherever we're at. So I've got 4 adapters, so 2, 3, 4, and 5 on here that are set for different VLANs, different things that I can do. Now, reason that I'm saying this, I mean, one, just because it's good to know about, but two, once we get into our setup down here, the interesting thing is a VM deployment will have the maximum number of interfaces on it. So remember I said that VMware allows for 10 interfaces. Yes, I know you only see 9 of them right here. One of them was management. Okay, so don't forget about that one. Always have to have your management interface. So that's the 10 interfaces, even though we won't be able to use them. So I went ahead and configured these all as tap interfaces just for the heck of it, mostly just to show that even though all of them are configured and committed and should be working, only the first 4, so I had 5 interfaces assigned to the host, one of them was for management, so that leaves 4 other interfaces right here. Only these 4 will be working. So configured up and up, actually shows us a 10 gig, that's kind of cool. I hadn't paid attention to that before. Needless to say, we won't really get 10 gig throughput on here, but all of the other ones will show configured but down. Right? And when we start out, everything shows as not configured and down. Okay, so it really doesn't give us any indication until we actually configure something on there. So I just wanted to point that out, that you may see extra things on here, whether we configure 5 through 9 or not the end of the world, won't do anything for us, but I just wanted to point out that it is based on how many you assign to your host and how many you assign to that particular VM for what is or is not going to show up in here. So as you're playing around with that, I certainly hope that helps you out and avoid some of the confusion for it. Alright, so we really did kind of our 3 important things to get started here. We had our interface management profiles, and we certainly created our zones, which is probably the most important thing, and then got into configure our interfaces themselves. And so those were kind of the differences in terms of where we got. We looked at, well, a little bit anyway, on both my physical switch as well as the VM, discussed some of the differences. There aren't any differences once we get to the interface configuration. They will function the same between the two of them, really, but in here we expanded this out and we dealt with our vWire, our TAP, and our layer 3 interfaces. So created them, including the sub interface and all the fun things that went along with it, and basically got ourselves set up in order to move forward and have our entire network be functional and be safe on there. So this is really the great place to get started. We have our basics laid out, so now we can move forward into our policies and everything else that we do from administering a standard firewall. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.